By now, you are probably relatively freaked out by having your fingerprint, facial recognition, or retinal pattern captured, hacked, and exploited. As of now, there are no US federal laws that protect your privacy from the potential hazards of biometrics. In Europe, thanks to the GDPR, the General Data Protection Rule, citizens have a great deal more control over their privacy, including biometrics. But short of moving to the EU, what can you do to protect your identifying traits from falling into the wrong hands? First and foremost, I would use biometrics very selectively. There's really no effective way to keep your biometrics out of the hands of strangers. You can't not leave your fingerprints on everything you touch, and probably aren't willing to cover your face every time you step out in public in front of a camera. But the biggest risk isn't what the general public could do with one of your biometrics. It's more about the companies and governments of the world that collect your biometrics and then have their databases breached or expand the way that they use your information. Consequently, the best way to minimize risks of biometric passwords is to use them selectively and only once they have proven the test of time. Apple's use of fingerprints is a good example. In addition to the fact that your fingerprint never leaves the Apple device, which forces hackers to go after the data one device at a time, the instances of actual hacked passwords from Apple fingerprint scanners are very rare. Facial recognition is a little different. It has the added privacy drawback of being used when you aren't explicitly agreeing to it, as cameras can record your face from across long distances. Apple maintains that this data never leaves your device either, and is not sold to advertisers or the government, but you should still be a little bit wary. Apple's insistence that your data is not being shared with others cannot be said for all devices and biometrics. I am far less comfortable using my fingerprint as an identifier at a theme park, a retailer, or for a non-required government service. But let me play the devil's advocate for just a minute. Biometric passwords, without question, are more convenient than competing methods of authenticating your accounts and devices. They are instantaneous, always with you, and very simple to use. On top of that, biometric data is much harder to sell on the dark web once it is stolen, as there isn't an easy way to turn it into immediate cash, like there would be with a bank login and password. And biometrics make it easier to use a long and strong password behind the biometric, behind the fingerprint or facial scan, which makes your devices and login data much safer. These traits make biometrics a compelling option. In most ways, biometrics are more secure than using weak traditional passwords. When they get lost or stolen, however, the privacy implications are potentially more damaging. While the technology is maturing and the bad guys are still actively hacking and discovering early flaws in biometrics, here are some of my recommendations. Remember that all biometrics are not created equal from a security standpoint. They vary based on the type of biometric used, the device on which it operates, and whether your information is ultimately stored on the device, in the cloud, or elsewhere. Additionally, it matters how every company in that chain of events uses, shares, and protects your information. This is not a one-size-fits-all answer. But as you research the quiltwork of factors relating to any biometrics you use, think about taking the following steps to protect the biometrics you already employ. As we talked about already, minimize the number of places that you utilize biometrics. The less you put your physical and behavioral traits into external databases, the less exposure you have. Don't be afraid, where possible, to slow down the process and think it through before you buy in to the technology. Alternatively, wait long enough to allow the hackers to expose major flaws and unintended consequences in all of these new devices. Think of biometrics like the internet in 1994, still young and needing more proof of concept. If you're uncomfortable with your current use of biometrics, with a fingerprint or facial scan, see if there is an alternative password option on your device. You can always use a traditional, long and strong alphanumeric password in place of a fingerprint scanner or facial recognition on your smartphone. Sacrificing convenience for security might just be worth it. Please make sure that the passwords behind your biometrics on your devices are long and unguessable. If your fingerprint is only protected by a 4-digit phone passcode, your chances of being hacked go way up. When you reach a situation in which you think a biometric is required, as is quickly becoming the case in workplaces, theme parks, cruise ships, etc., ask if there is a way to opt out. It may be a bit less convenient than just giving in, but it will keep your biometric footprint as small as possible. I have personally chosen to limit my biometric use to my Apple devices because they have proven that they are both secure and private over the past 5 years. In fact, I think that the Apple device and our smartphones will become the primary way that we authenticate using biometrics. As an example of how it can go wrong, in India, citizens had no choice but to register a retinal scan as identification for government services. After the successful hacking of that database of almost 1 billion biometric identifiers, the program has been completely shelved. I hope that we won't repeat those mistakes here in the US. And one final thought. The company that promises that their biometric technology is unhackable or doesn't threaten your privacy is simply trying to sell you something. No technology is perfect, and those companies that can admit it have more integrity than the others. Listen, I'm not advocating that you don't use the technology, just that you stop, think, and make an informed choice before you dive headlong into leaving your fingerprints all over other people's business. And thanks for choosing to watch Sileo on Security.